Welcome to the Ascend Leadership Monthly Webinar Series. This is where we're going to explore real world skills to help leaders develop confidence and clarity in the way that they show up. This month, we're diving into trust. Trust shows up in every part of our lives. We trust the stoplight to turn green. In theory, we trust the barista to get our coffee order right. We trust that neighbor walking the big dog that they're going to keep them on the leash. And at work, we're trusting our colleagues to do their jobs, not just to get it done, but to do it right and for the right reasons. Trust is part of how we communicate with teams across departments, with our clients. It shows up at the organizational level. If you're a leader, do people believe you? Do they believe you'll follow through? Do they trust you despite uncertainty? And with clients, I said that a minute ago, do they trust your work? Do they believe you understand their needs, that you're looking out for their best interests? So it's everything that we do. It's not a switch, though. We can't be trusting or not trusting. It's not an either or. It's layered, it's fragile, it's fluid. It's all shaped by how we show up moment by moment, day to day. And so because of it, because it's something we actively shape, we have to make sure that we are aware and then we are being mindful so that we can not just build it, but strengthen it, and if need be, restore it. Hi, I'm Jana Etienne. After a 26 plus year career as a practicing CPA in public accounting, I am now a consultant, a trainer, and a speaker. My work is centered on something that I call fearless inclusion, which I define as the freedom to be yourself and the ability to create space for others to do the same. And that freedom to be yourself, that's the part around self-awareness and mindfulness that we need to be thinking of, because we want people to trust who we are, our authentic selves. And then that ability to create space for others to do the same. As leaders, we call that psychological safety, and psychological safety cannot happen without trust. I'm going to touch on these two things as we go along. But who am I? I develop these trainings and workshops like the one you're attending today. And all of my work is organized around 4 core skills that I think are necessary to drive organizational change, but not as an organizational strategy, but through each of us. That is authenticity and intentionality, crafting culture, conscious communications, and understanding difference. My passion is helping professionals build deep connections and cultivate safety, thriving as mindful, inclusive, and trusted leaders. This is my Ascend Leadership Model framework, and it's the basis, if you will, for this monthly series. It's built on the idea that leadership isn't just about, a list of abilities or list of competencies. It's how we show up and how we connect with others and how we take action with purpose. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter your title. John Maxwell said, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And Peter Drucker said, the only definition of a leader is someone who has followers. And I like to say that leadership is the outcome of the space that you craft. So trust, it's part of all of this. It's central to authenticity. People trust leaders who are consistent, who are honest, grounded in their values. It fuels connection because it allows relationships, or it's actually what allows relationships to deepen and collaboration. I'll just say collaboration to happen. It's essential for empowerment because people can't grow, you can't lead, you can't take risks if you don't feel trusted and trust those around you. Navigation, when teams are under pressure and face that uncertainty. I said a second ago, navigating through uncertainty, navigating, working through discomfort, all of these require trust. And trust, it is not granted or guaranteed because of your title. You might have the title that makes you a leader. It is your actions that will determine how much people trust you. The Speed of Trust. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it. So this quote here, to me, it speaks to a few things. Number 1, trust is a universal connector in all of our relationships. Number 2, it impacts us every day, all the time. Number 3, it's a key leadership competency. So in the book, what Kelly describes, he talks about trust as driving results. He says that it boosts efficiency, drives consistency, builds loyalty, and as a result of this, trust produces speed, which is how you get to profitability. I like to think of trust as the oxygen in the room. You can't see it, you can't smell it, but everything depends on it. Our relationships depend on it, our success depends on it. So, understanding how to establish it, where do you even get it from, how to strengthen it, and then how to restore it is a must have for today's effective and successful business leaders. Now, before I go any further, I want to remind you all, I'm going to pop over here to the Q&A, just to make sure my screen is working. All right, so please, I'd love for this to be a conversation. I think I'm sorry, folks, my Q&A was upside down. Never mind. It's working now, and somebody said they thought I should have a picture of Doug in here. Doug is my dog. Maybe next time, so thank you, Nicole. All right, so put your questions in the Q&A. I will try to track them as we go along. Chris, if you would do me a favor, and if a question comes in that you think I should pause and take a look at, let me know. I'm happy to jump over and take a look.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, so let's jump in. If you know me, you know I like to start with definitions. So what does the dictionary say is the definition of trust? This is from Merriam-Webster. And it's the belief that something is what it says it is and does what it says it does every time. And if something does change, that change doesn't come as a surprise. At the very bottom here, you see the word faith. That one really resonates for me as well because it's about belief in something intangible, yet deeply connected to someone or something. So think about, I said earlier, I think I said traffic light, that the light will turn green. We're trusting the traffic system that everyone, for the most part, understands and follows the same rules. That trust is what keeps the traffic flowing. It's invisible, but it works until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, we all know the results can be catastrophic. When we are interacting with others, this is what we're talking about. Our trust, we are looking at and relying on indicators. We're trusting them to be consistent, that others will be reliable, that the system is effective as designed. We work in a high trust profession. Our profession and our businesses are high trust environments. We rarely think about that, but everything's fine until something goes wrong. And trust is at the root of all of that. Okay, another book. I love this book. I first read this back, I want to say 2013. I have come back to this over and over again. And in all of my programs around trust, activities, workshops, discussions, it comes back to what the framework that was offered in this book, because I find it to be intuitive and clear and relatable. So let me back up. This book focuses on trust as the center or the context of a professional relationship between a consultant and their client. There you get the trusted advisor. And it ties back to that third definition of trust in the dictionary, trust as a duty, as a condition of some form of relationship. It's the duty and responsibility we have as CPAs to our clients. Now, I keep talking about this in the context of a CPA serving their clients in a public accounting firm, but this is true whether you're the controller or the CFO in an organization. Your organization is depending on you in the same way. So the lens that this book uses are universal, even though it's talking about it in the context of relationship. Now, there are many different ways. If you go out and Google trust, there are a lot of different frameworks for trust. There's the 3 pillars framework that looks at 3 components: integrity, competence, and benevolence. There's the ABCD model that looks at ability, believability, connectedness, and dependability. They each focus on different aspects and how they combine to create, strengthen, or in the absence of them, erode trust. I like the one in this book because it comes and it portrays trust as an equation. So here, let me show you. Mouse, where are you? Okay, this is the trust equation. And it uses many of the same components that you might see in other frameworks. What I think sets it apart, though, is that The framework touches on all of these in different ways, at two different levels, if you will. First, it identifies the four components. We can see them: credibility, reliability, intimacy, self-orientation. But this visual representation also tells us a little bit more about how they relate. In other words, the three elements at the top come together, but can be undermined, if you will, by the element in the denominator. So I do like the fact that it creates the space for nuance, for fluidity. And I like it because it's a formula and I'm an accountant. But by offering a visualization like this, it allows us to understand the interconnectedness and not see this as a list. You already get a sense of what's involved. And since I like to start with definitions, what I actually want to do is walk through each of these terms, because I do think shared language is important when we are learning an idea or trying to understand something. Knowing what the terms mean and sharing that amongst each other is important. It's also important that as you start moving forward, thinking about how these apply for you, you might not have the same definition as the other person. It's not like we get to stop every time we're having a conversation and say, well, hold on, how do you define that word? But for you to have clarity of what that means for you is important. So let's see, can I go over the A, B, C, D of trust again? Sorry, I don't have that. Let me go back in my notes. I can look at that for you, Judy. Remind me. Another question. Beth is asking about tools and ideas when somebody to get trust once you've lost it. I actually have, folks, if you'll hang in there with me at the very end, at the end of the slides, I have one slide dedicated to each building, maintaining, and restoring trust with a series of things that we can do. So thank you for that. When employees lack trust in their immediate supervisor because the supervisor doesn't give them what they want. Group dynamics, relational power, power dynamics. So Siobhan, look for that. That's coming up. Okay, so I do want to make sure we go through these definitions. Let's jump in right now. Okay, first, credibility. This means I can trust what you say about ... As in, I can trust the words coming out of your mouth. It is the language you're using, not just in the moment, but over time. And it's not just the actual words, it's about how credible others perceive those words to be. And the other side of that is about experience. And by that, I mean the words people are expecting to come out of your mouth. Credibility has two components: cognitive and emotional, or I use the word rational here on the screen. So rational or cognitive trust is built on competence. This is the belief or confidence that you have the right skills and abilities. Now, we live in a profession full of credentials. So rational, that's easy. Your partner in a firm, you pass the CPA exam, you have the CFO, CPA, a credential behind your name, you have a resume, and it shows your education, your career progression, the different roles and organizations you work for. Just looking at the paper, I can trust you have the right kind of experience. That's relatively easy, the rational side, but the emotional side is harder, especially because we often assume in this profession, a very highly technical profession, that the rational piece is all clients care about. Emotional trust is based on the belief that someone cares about your well-being. It's implied, it's felt, and that's through how someone experiences, interacts with you. Now, this is literally then how we show up. I just said literally. Do we dress the part? Or figuratively? Are we prepared? Are we present? What about, do we convey commitment? Do we convey a sense of connection? Do we get along? Does it seem like we care? We have to think beyond, we have the technical skills, we show up and we do the work. But we have to figure out about and understand about the importance of connecting. So our credentials will give us a starting point. Credibility gives us a base level of trust. But if we don't get to the emotion side, it'll only take us so far. The next element is called reliability. And this is I can trust you to what? Follow through. I can trust that you're going to count on to that you'll do what you say you'll do it consistently, you'll do it dependably. So reliability is about your actions and your behaviors. The more often you interact with someone, the more chances you will have to reinforce whatever those perceptions are, some of which started based on that rational credibility. Or you could undermine it. The interesting thing about reliability, too, is that it can be borrowed. And that is why referrals and introductions are so effective. If you recommend someone to me and I trust you, some part of my trust in you will transfer to them, at least initially. Their credibility is assumed and their reliability then is expected. But that's a fragile trust. If the referral doesn't show up as expected or the performance drops over time, reliability plummets, and it can plummet faster than, say, the trust that you earned. And so I'm talking about the referral. Let me give you an example. So my husband and we recently remodeled our entire first floor. It started as an update to the kitchen and it's spiraled out of control to the whole first floor, but that's a good thing. We are ecstatic about the results. But if you go back about 18 months before that, my mother-in-law passed away. We had to sell her house and it hadn't been really renovated or any real work done since the 80s. We didn't know where to start, and so I turned to the realtor. She was somebody that I had known for almost 20 years in business back when I was in practice. We had a very strong network. I trusted her. She referred a contractor. She trusted him. We hired him largely based on her recommendation. He did a fabulous job. Now, fast forward to when we want to do our kitchen and we contact him. He comes over, he gets an estimate. He walked through the space. We had these great conversations and then we never heard from him again. We reached out a few times. He never responded. We gave up. The bottom line is it doesn't matter at this point. Our trust was broken. Now, I didn't lose trust in that realtor completely, but I will tell you that if she were to make a referral for me in the future, I wouldn't be as quick to trust them because she trusts them. And so that's why referrals are risky. If someone fails, if the person that you referred fails, it can reflect on you. And they carry weight because they carry your reputation. So this is one of the things about reliability. Reliability extends to how you show up and the way that you bring other people with you and the other people that you recommend, refer, and work with. People on your team, for example. Okay, next slide. Intimacy. Intimacy is a strange word that you don't always hear in business, but let's be clear. Work is personal. So intimacy means I trust you enough to talk to you about something that matters, that I feel safe opening up, that I can be real with you, and you will handle it with care. So intimacy at work, this is about feeling comfortable enough to share personal or sensitive information. And if you think about it from the client perspective, this is about us being able to see how the sausage is made, if you will. Work is an intimate place. We build relationships with coworkers. We care about the teams we lead. If you work in HR or the legal team, you might know some very private information, or your clients some very high stakes financial information. So it's important that we have this connectivity, if you will, at the emotional level. And I don't mean feelings like, that was probably not the best way to say that. I don't mean personal feelings because of, the feelings that I might share with my husband or my children or my best friend. But this is about showing vulnerability and a willingness to open up. If we hold back our emotions, we might seem aloof, we might seem indifferent, we might seem as if we just are here to get the work done. And the challenge with this profession in particular is that the accounting stereotype is that we are reserved, that we are objective, that we are analytical. And all of that suggests we are not emotional. And by that, I mean, we don't have emotions, but we do. We're human, we feel, and we can't be afraid to Show those emotions at work, right? I have emotions, don't be afraid to use them, kind of thing. Emotional health is deeply tied to trust. Would you trust somebody who is emotionally shut down or emotionally all over the place? Either of those extremes, no. You want to know that they are grounded, they are centered, um, and that they have emotional intelligence. We actually talked about emotional intelligence last month in this series. This is about this isn't about like stuffing in your feelings or feeling the need to be overly expressive. It's knowing, understanding, and then managing emotions. So it helps us read the room. It's what helps us stay grounded during difficult conversations. It's what helps us stay present with a client instead of shutting down or blowing up when something hits a nerve. And I get that intimacy at work can feel risky. It requires us to be vulnerable. It can backfire and you can't fake it. So that's the thing. With real connection, especially with client work, it requires this type of vulnerability and connection. And building that type of rapport means feeling safe enough to share the deeper stuff. And it's fluid. I give a little bit of information, I share something with you, they share with me, I share with you. And so it's this cycle that eventually strengthens and deepens. Now, I mentioned you have credibility, reliability, and vulnerability at the top, intimacy at the top. Below it is self-orientation in the formula, and that can undermine all of the high value that you get from being a 10 out of 10 on these other items, on the factors. And this one, if you're a 0, or sorry, if this one, if you score high in the self-orientation part of the formula, it undermines everything. So there's a famous quote by Teddy Roosevelt. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Right? That's about trust. To trust you, they need to believe that you care more than just about yourself. Now, some self-interest is to be expected. Selflessness, good thing in general, but too much of any good thing is not a good thing, right? And at some point, if you are too selfless, you might come across as inauthentic. So when it comes to trust, self-orientation is about how focused you are on others versus yourself in the moment, in this situation, over time. We can be credible, reliable, vulnerable, but trust will not be strong unless we are also clear that we're looking out for others and not just for ourselves. Now, professional distance, might seem like a positive thing until it makes you seem aloof. When people feel like you care more about yourself or you don't care at all and just here to get the job done, that can sow distrust. And that type of indifference is a trust killer, if you will. Now, high self-orientation, this means I'm highly focused on myself. This is prioritizing your own to-do list. This is you need to be right all the time. This is I don't want to say I don't know, name dropping to boost your image. These are the kinds of things that suggest you are very much self-oriented. You are focused on your own needs, your wants, your goals. Not good for trust. Low self-orientation is the opposite, and that is very good for trust. This is listening to what the other person needs, listening and understanding someone's situation, listening with empathy, focusing on their problems and not jumping to the solution. Now, a word of caution about selflessness, where selflessness, I said, can make you appear to be aloof or inauthentic. What might it signal to somebody? You might be overextending yourself. You might be experiencing or demonstrating boundary issues. So you're not really reliable, that there's some imbalance in some of the power dynamics that can sow distrust, especially if people are observing you interacting with other people. Maybe they can't read your intentions clearly. The bottom line is we don't trust people who are only in it for themselves. If you're working for me, my needs matter. It's fine if you benefit, just not at my expense. take a quick look at the Q&A. Okay, I'm going to save those so far. Those are good questions. Thank you. I'm going to hold those until we get later in the session. All right. I want to shift the conversation then to the team and the organizational dynamics that depend on trust. Now, I know this sounds cheesy, but I'm going to say it. Teamwork begins with building trust. What is it? Teamwork makes the dream work. Is that the saying? But that doesn't work if we don't trust each other. One-on-one trust is important. Oftentimes when we think of trust, we think about between you and I. And this is important, but trust in an organization is a bit of a collective. So one-on-one trust isn't enough. It's having trust across the team. It's different teams trusting each other. At the leadership level, it's trust across the entire organization. And that's because this trust doesn't live in a vacuum. It lives in all of the spaces between us, how we operate together, the patterns we create, the things we reinforce, or potentially unknowingly erode. And so as we explore these dynamics, I want you to keep this quote in mind. If we don't trust that others have the best teams, if we don't trust that the others have the team's best, not the best team, the team's best interests at heart, it's almost impossible to build the kind of trust we need to move forward as a team. So talking about trust or the lack of it in groups and team settings, I want to look at 4 categories. There are countless numbers of dynamics and factors that I could have brought up, but we don't have a lot of time in my full leadership program. There's an entire section where we talk about some of these different elements and a couple of activities that we can do. There's a checklist that I included as a handout. Please make sure you download it. It's really just a self assessment, if you will, an opportunity for reflection, since it's just me and the screen. And I hope that you will take that and do that after, continue some of the work. But I say all of this because these are just 4 general areas. Well, the last one is a bit of a catch-all, but it's important to understand that these dynamics are things that are natural, that it doesn't make us good or bad. The challenge is noticing when it starts to shift, if you will, and it starts to create subtle imbalances or breaks down, and those signals that I was talking about where we trust the signals, that those don't seem to be resonating the same way or feel the same. We can notice that by starting to look at some of these patterns. Unspoken rules, unwritten rules, I should say unspoken rules, are those unspoken norms. Groupthink is how we work as a collective. Relational power is how we, the different positions and roles we have in organizations and how they influence our behaviors. So we'll go one by one then. Unwritten rules are the unspoken expectations and norms that guide the way we behave in a group. They're the things we do or avoid doing to be successful, but they're not written down anywhere. These are rules that are deeply ingrained in culture, not just societal culture, but organizational culture and team culture, because you can have different types of cultures at different levels. And we learn these through observation and experience, not necessarily because we are taught them or somebody explains them to us explicitly. If you've ever heard one of these sayings, you know what I'm talking about. Read between the lines. You got to play by the game. You got to play the rules. What is it? You got to play by the rules. That's the way the game is played, something like that. You ever feel like you're walking on eggshells, and that's because there's some unspoken things that you're sort of carefully treading around? There are others. If you have some, drop them in the Q&A. I'll keep an eye out for those. Share them with each other. The thing is, all of these speak to this underlying, often invisible, mostly unspoken rules that drive our behavior, especially the way we behave in groups and across organizations. So I'm going to keep my eye on the Q&A to see if you all put any other ideas in there that I couldn't think of. Okay, so what am I talking about in terms of dynamics? Excuse me. These are the environments that I was talking about where the certain behaviors are expected but not explained. Thank you. Somebody said, read the room. That's a good one. I actually brought that up last month in emotional intelligence because not everyone can do that. And sometimes that's a practiced, a learned skill. Now, these unwritten rules, I want to say up front that these aren't necessarily bad. Unwritten rules can provide structure. They can create some sense of stability because the space feels the way we are expecting it to feel. Someone here, Gary, says it's a common sense thing. Yeah, that's a good one. It's common sense. For who? These invisible norms shape how we interact with people, who holds influence, whose voice is heard. And on the positive side, this can help things feel consistent. It can help us preserve traditions and standards. It can help us reduce the need to spell everything out all the time, all the little things. However, when these norms become unclear, they start to exclude people or they are misaligned with the stated goals of the team and the values of the organization, they can start to do more harm than good. You might notice patterns of favoritism or exclusion. And when there's no transparency, people are trying to figure out, like, how are decisions being made around here? And over time, this can lead to things like resistance, withdrawal, silence, misunderstandings, which of course comes as no surprise. People hold back because they fear unspoken consequences, and that creates broader risks like confirmation bias. We see what we think we see, or we hear what we want to hear that validates what we already believe. So when I'm not hearing anything else, if you will, hold that thought when we get to groupthink. When this happens, innovation slows down, people disengage. And all of this is happening even if no one says anything out loud. The pressure to conform isolates those who don't conform or for whatever reason can't, where they can't fit into those hidden norms. And that's going to foster this exclusion, miscommunication, and mistrust. Ultimately, these unspoken expectations can stifle growth and perpetuate a culture where people feel like they have to play by the rules, even when they know those rules aren't serving them, the team, or the work. Now, I just said, remember that for groupthink. Groupthink is a term coined by a psychologist, a research psychologist. His name was Irving Janis, and this was around poor decisions that emerge from groups and teams. So groupthink happens when there's this desire for harmony and cohesion that overrides good decision making and problem solving. Now, I mentioned that these aren't necessarily bad things. Groupthink is an automatic, natural phenomenon, and it tends to show up naturally over time. We're social animals. Remember, there's a reason we said there's safety in numbers. That instinct to cluster and to group up, if you will, helped us survive for thousands of years. So, not necessarily a bad thing. We seek alignment in the workplace. We want to get along. We want our teams to move forward. We want to minimize friction. However, the challenge can come when that drive for harmony starts to suppress dissent, silence critical voices, censor differences of opinion, discourage new perspectives. And this happens subtly. This doesn't just come out of the blue. Think about things like you don't want to start conflict, right? Something doesn't feel big enough to push back on, so you don't say anything. You're not sure, so you decide to wait and see. You're curious the way things play out before you jump in. Or you may say, it's not my job, I'm not bringing it up. In and of themselves, none of these are inherently bad. But left unaddressed, they can start to creep up. And psychological safety is what might be lacking here. This is the ability to speak up without fear, that knowing that a dissenting opinion, asking a question, saying, I'm not sure, it won't cost you your credibility, your reputation, or a sense of being part of the team. It can be hard to notice when this is happening. So here are some things to look at. The signs are subtle, but if you step back and look at the symptoms you see here on the left and the risks that you see here on the right, you might be able to start to, you might be able to start to catch it a little earlier, because people will hold back their opinions, their concerns, and assuming others won't agree with them or that they'll be dismissed. They don't want to go against the current. They stay silent. That's self-censorship. The illusion of unanimity. This is common. No one objects, so we assume everyone agrees, right? Given the impression that we're all on the same page, even when we know that's not true. Or what about overconfidence in the group? People think or feel like we're so aligned and we're so in sync that we just know we are on the right track. Critical thinking goes out the window. It takes a back seat. We don't necessarily question the assumptions we've made or look at and compare against other alternatives. And so this is really important because when groupthink is in happening and it's starting to undermine our performance, it leads to poor decision making, unethical decision making, inefficiencies, disengagement. Ultimately, that speed of trust gone. From Stephen Covey, we have no speed of trust. Relational power is the influence someone holds because of their relationships, their status, their access, or their ability to connect with others. Now, again, not inherently a bad thing. And in fact, when used well, it can strengthen trust. An influential leader can be a mentor or a sponsor. They're in a position of title, or they're in a leadership position by title or by influence, and that can help others grow, succeed. They can bridge communication gaps. They can open the door to resources. So relational power in and of itself isn't the thing, it's how it's used or misused. It can lead to cliques, favoritism, that stifling of dissenting voices by either activating or reinforcing some of those groupthink dynamics. It can be protecting the status quo. All of this, as you can see, it can be where trust starts to erode. People feel like certain voices are always carrying more weight or others are consistently ignored. Relational power can actually also set who gets to determine those unwritten rules on what acceptable looks like in the team. And somebody might not even realize how much their preferences are shaping the behaviors of others. So this is going to be the one where self-awareness can be particularly important, because one of the challenges of being a leader is that the truths don't always flow uphill, right? What comes up to you as feedback is what is perceived to be safe, not necessarily what's actually happening. Now, power dynamics are how that relational power gets expressed or how it's felt in the group. They're visible or invisible in the ways that it shows up in our interactions. It shapes who speaks, who gets heard, who feels safe enough to contribute. And this isn't just titles and hierarchy. It influences everything. It has to do with visibility. It has to do with group loyalty. It can even have to do with communication style. So sometimes it's obvious, like who's running a meeting, who's approving a decision. But other times it's more subtle. Who interrupts or gets interrupted? Who gets the credit? Whose tone seems to be scrutinized that they're too, emotional or too direct or too assertive or not assertive enough, and others don't ever get that feedback? Is there somebody, or do you start to sense that some people's ideas are overlooked and other people's ideas are amplified? And these dynamics, they cause people to second guess themselves. They don't want to offend. They don't want to be misunderstood. They don't want to be labeled. They don't want to think speaking up will make it worse. And so what happens here is people shut down, they hold back. And when that happens, they do not share their ideas. And that is why and when collaboration drops and innovation is stifled. And it's not necessarily because you're doing something wrong. You just don't feel safe anymore in the group, that what you want to offer or what you have to share is going to be heard, listened to, and respected. This last slide here, there are a lot of other factors that influence trust that we can explore. Things like tone policing, where we're listening to how people say what they say, or people don't want to be judged. Code switching, when you're the outsider, and so you might be perceived as uninformed or disruptive, even though you might be raising valid points. There are a lot of differences that are at play. And so I just wanted to put this here as a placeholder reminder that there's so much more to this. As I said at the beginning, it's how we show up all day, every day. And that's what's going to directly impact trust. Body language too. Thank you, Beth. The problem with communication is the illusion that it has occurred. It is exactly what you said, Beth, about body language. Please don't mistake speaking for communication. Only 7% of what we say, 7 to 14% of what we say, that's what people remember. That's what the studies tell us. Most of our communication is nonverbal. So it's body language, it's facial expression, it's tone of voice. They all carry meaning. And so everything we discussed today and everything that we're going to be doing to try to strengthen, deepen, restore, establish trust requires clarity in communication. It's what we say and don't say. It's how we say things, who we listen to, how we do things. It's how we show up every day. So that's why, ding, 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 conscious communication. I think this is the single most important leadership competency of all, because without this, we don't get to start the race, if you will. Conscious communication goes beyond surface level exchanges, and it's about engaging with this heightened awareness and sensitivity. It's the art of communication that starts with intention. First, identifying your intention. Second, conveying your intention. And third, confirming that it was received the way you meant it. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, have you ever had this somebody or said this out loud? That is not what I meant. Or that is not what I intended. Maybe they were confused, maybe they were frustrated, but our intent was positive, So I was trying to be helpful. Whatever I said was very well meaning. When this happens, when there's a disconnect between what you intend and how you express and how it is received, intention, what I meant to do, how it was received, impact. That gap is the intention impact gap. And when that happens, someone else is experiencing something very differently than what we were expecting. Sometimes it might actually catch us completely by surprise. Maybe they felt dismissed, offended, excluded. Maybe you said something that they thought was disrespectful. And now the conversation you thought you were having has suddenly shifted so that we can talk about what it is that we meant. This gap in leadership can make or break trust, and it can happen like that. I'm sorry, I was snapping and I'm thinking, is that too loud on the microphone? When people experience something negative like that, like they have if something somebody did has an impact on me that wasn't what they expected, that will stay with them. It will carry with them and potentially for a long period of time, which can slowly erode trust. And we don't get to decide how someone experiences us. They do. So when we dismiss this impact as, that wasn't my intention, that can come across as defensive, dismissive. Remember that self-orientation, vulnerability, those things start to show up and really distort the trust value, if you will, the result of that trust equation. So owning our impact is so powerful. It shows emotional maturity and it builds trust. It shows that vulnerability that we were talking about. Now, I want to briefly touch on these terms because they're often used interchangeably, but they're not the same. And when it comes to leadership, when it comes to trust, when it comes to understanding the difference between my intention and my impact, this matters. So it's really simple. I think the slide speaks for itself. Intent is what's motivating you. I want to be healthy. Intention is what is the goal? I want to lose weight. Intentionality is what is the plan? I'm going to work out 3 times a week and cut I don't want to cut calories. Calorie counting doesn't work. Speaking for myself, there's no judgment here. Perhaps you're starting to hear what's going on in my mind. I'm going to move back into the presentation. Intent, intention, and intentionality are distinctly different, and it's important to know the difference. So as you are thinking about planning for and engaging in interactions, you're clear in what you are expressing. When you are grounded in your intention and in your purpose, it can help you think about ways to engage and to communicate and to understand the ways other people might be experiencing you and feeling you, hearing you, understanding you. Now, that handout that I gave you has some reflection questions on the second page that can help you perhaps understand how trust is the where trust might be strong or might need some work. I don't want to say broken, but where it might need some help in restoring it and strengthening it. And some of that might start with reflection. I also want to talk about vulnerability because I've used this word several times. And I just want to make sure that when we talk about vulnerability, we're not talking about oversharing, right? This isn't about telling everybody everything. It's about knowing what's appropriate. It's about knowing what's helpful for you and for others. There's a fine line between openness and oversharing, and it can be tricky. And we all know what oversharing feels like. It's uncomfortable. It's awkward. So we just want to be thoughtful. For example, saying something like, I'm still working on how I feel about this. I don't quite have the words yet, to be honest, and I'm not ready to talk about it. It puts it out there that I'm not okay, but I'm also not asking you to fix it, and I'm being open with you about that. Now, the other thing I don't want to skip over, and then I'll show you the list of suggestions. The other thing I don't want to skip over here is that anxiety. So the definition of anxiety is the feeling of worry, nervousness, and unease about something uncertain and potentially negative. So this is a natural thing. It's a natural response that we have. So it's normal. It doesn't mean a bad thing. But what's important to understand is it also can be part of what's happening internally, a narrative, if you will, in our minds. So insecurities, self-doubt, fear of being misunderstood, they can start to creep in, and they're showing up in ways that we don't necessarily realize. It's not because we're bad communicators or bad leaders. It's because we're human. But they can lead to unconscious behaviors that we're not aware of, and they can directly impact how we're being received, and as a result, the levels of trust that people have in us. So this is not about fixing all of our anxieties or insecurities. What this is about is self-awareness, knowing what gets in the way so we can move forward with more clarity, with more empathy, and with more consistency. Okay, so you've been asking how. Here are those ideas. What can we do to strengthen trust? Well, remember, it's static. It isn't static. It evolves. So when you first meet someone, their baseline level of trust, it's enough to be polite, to work together, to move forward. But in order to continue that, you have to reinforce it every single day. So what does that look like? You follow up on even the little things and consistently. You offer feedback in a way that builds people up, doesn't break people down, asking questions and then listening to the answers, not listening to respond, listening to understand. Being clear about what you know, humble about what you don't know. 1, 2, third from the bottom. Can you walk me through your thinking on this? This is you saying, I want to understand a little bit more about where you're coming from, right? This is creating space for others to contribute. That is how we strengthen trust. These are all little moments. Notice that none of these are big actions. They're all the little things that matter. When we look at safeguarding trust, building trust, you get some to start, and then the rest of it is about sustained, ongoing awareness. It's consistency in action. Because if we don't pay attention, it can slip. Sometimes that trust is lost quickly, like what I told you about the contractor, and other times it works slowly, slips away. What worked yesterday to build trust, not working anymore today. So what does safeguarding trust mean? Paying attention to those little things, showing up when it matters, even when it's inconsistent. We tend to do this in a new relationship, but are we doing it and not taking for granted older, long-standing relationships, right? Being honest about bad news, not hiding it, not sugarcoating it, not letting unspoken tension drag on just because it's awkward. This is why understanding how to facilitate and navigate those uncomfortable conversations is a critical competency. And it's so important for building trust, especially important for restoring trust. Because it's easy to take trust for granted once you have it. But once a small crack forms, think about it in terms of a building foundation. If you don't patch it right away, eventually the foundation can crumble. And then in terms of restoring trust, that's the good news. You can restore it. It's not easy, and it depends on how serious was the breach, how long has it been broken, how strong was the trust before, and the longer it's ignored or the deeper the break, the harder the repair. But it's not impossible. The first step is showing up, owning your role, even if it wasn't your fault. And sometimes, as the leader, it is your job to start building the bridge back. I have on here apologize. Yes, apologize. More importantly, demonstrate the change through your actions. Follow through, because when it comes to rebuilding trust, people don't want to hear it. They want to see it. And listen, really listen. Let other people express their frustration, their hurt, their anger without trying to jump in and defend or explain, understanding what they need to move forward. All of this is what I was talking about trust being built in the everyday. It's not about saying the perfect thing or showing up perfectly. It's about showing up, paying attention, and following through. This is the handout, by the way, that I was talking about. You should see it there. And if you don't see it, you're welcome to reach out to me. I think I saw it there, so I think you should be fine. Okay, we have a few minutes. Let me go ahead and look at the Q&A. I think, Chris, you marked a few. How can we mend the intention impact gap? When somebody says something, or when somebody says something and it signals to you that maybe you had an impact on them that you didn't expect, the first thing is to acknowledge that that was not your intention, but you don't want to say it in a way that is like, oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't my intention. How you do this will depend on your style, the situation, and the context. But what's important to remember is that learning a little bit more about how they heard something or how they received something, and acknowledging that harm, acknowledging that hurt, that is not what you intended to do. You want to start by understanding where they are, and from there you can work your way back to whatever it is you wanted to talk about. But if you can't understand where they are, they're going to shut off and walk away. And so that's why it's important to get a sense of what's going on for them. Listening with empathy, listening to understand, acknowledging what they said, I heard you, is important. How to maintain trust when your work has performed. How to maintain trust when your work has performed. Performance management quotas. I don't think I'm understanding that wording of that question. I'm so sorry. I don't want to say this name because it's identifiable, but I would ask you, who's ever asking me this, reach out to me directly, tell me a little bit more about that question. My contact information is on the slides, and you're welcome to email me directly. What about others not having same or similar values and attitudes, following laws, rules, and regulations? We are not all going to share the same values, goals, objectives, and purpose. What's important is that we have a shared value around the thing we're trying to do, and we are working on, we have to have that shared understanding and then work collaboratively on how we're going to get there. So it's not my way, it's not your way, it's what is the best way for the situation. That's the only way we can ever work in groups, because we cannot come to something with it's my way or the highway. I'm right, you're wrong. This power over dynamic does not work for either one of us. Neither one of us want the other person to overpower us. We all want to be seen and heard. So working collaboratively is the only way that's going to happen. And the only way that's going to happen is if it's okay for people to bring themselves as they are. So we don't want to judge. We want to make sure that people feel safe enough to ask a question. And if we're not observing that around us, then this is that opportunity for us to step back and try to reflect on what are the things that I've said, maybe get some feedback, or what are the impacts that I've had, and really build up that self-awareness. So there were only 3 questions in here that you marked, and the second one is the one I was struggling to understand. How do you break group think in a meeting? I attend a lot of board meetings and see this frequently. Well, one of the things you can do, so it depends on the dynamics in the group. First of all, there has to be psychological safety where you feel you can speak up, because that alone will stop you, stop it cold. So one of the questions might be to raise your hand and say, hey, I thought there were some other ideas on the table. Can we circle back to those? And then ask some people, just out of curiosity, What might be an alternative to this thing that we're talking about? What you're trying to do is disrupt what is that ball that is quickly rolling down the hill so that we can at least start to throw some other ideas out on the table. That's the first thing that came to mind for me, by the way, when you said that. It depends on what's happening in the meeting, but that's an idea. It's a challenge to respect people's time when you're trying to get quick replies. What would you suggest when staff perceives you as being bossy and demanding? Hmm. Yeah, that's going to be larger about workplace culture. If you're starting to struggle with that, I would recommend having one-on-ones with your team or setting some communication rules and expectations uh, that everybody, we honor a 2-hour turnaround. So I can't reach out and ask for you to respond right away, but I can ask for everybody to respond to each other within 2 hours. Some kind of protocol, some kind of team norms. Um, Based on the reading of the question, that's the first thing that popped up. And I'm trying to be mindful of time, so I apologize if I'm going super fast. I do want to remind you all that this is a monthly webinar series. Next month, confident decision making. So join us for that. After that, we have, what do I have? Facilitating difficult conversations in May, mindful leadership practices in June. And if you want to learn more about how I can bring this program to your organizations, or here, if you want to reach out to me because of these questions, I didn't answer them as quickly as fully as I would have liked, reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions at any time.